Open this public hearing of the Standing Committee on Communications and the Arts for the inquiry into the challenges and opportunities within the Australian live music industry. I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples as the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today and pay my respects to their ancestors and elders past, present and future. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us here today and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their cultural and spiritual connections to lands, waters and seas. By way of introduction, I am Brian Mitchell, Chair of the Committee, and I'll just ask other members to introduce themselves.
Bridget Archer, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Committee and the member for Bass in Tasmania.
Hi, I'm Libby Coker, member for Corangamite, which takes in the Bellarine Surf Coast around the city of Geelong in Victoria.
And we'll have other members join us presently, I believe. I now call representatives of Live Nation. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Good morning to all. My full name is Michael Henry Koppel. I am the Chairman of Live Nation Australasia and I appear to represent that company.
Thank you, Mr Koppel. As these proceedings are public, they are being broadcast and recorded by Hansard. If you wish to have evidence heard in private, please let the committee know and we will consider your request. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I wish to advise you this hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. Giving false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. If you object to answering the question, please state the reasons for your objection and the committee will consider the matter. And before inviting you to make an opening statement, I see we've just been joined and I'll ask you to introduce yourself, Ms Templeman.
Susan Templeman, the member for Macquarie and Special Envoy for the Arts.
Thank you. And Mr Koppel, if you've got an opening statement, we invite you to make it now.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. As I introduce myself, I'm Michael Koppel, the Chairman of Live Nation Australasia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We also pay our respects to the First Nations artists who contribute so richly to Australia's vibrant musical and cultural scene. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the committee's recent correspondence and to apologise for any delays or any oversights in our responses. We certainly welcome the opportunity to appear today. Live Nation Entertainment Inc. is the global leader in live entertainment. It's headquartered in the USA and publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Live Nation Entertainment, or LNE, has several global business segments, which include Live Nation Concerts, Live Nation Media and Sponsorship, and Ticketmaster. LNE operates a number of subsidiaries in Australia to manage its operations in this country. I chair Live Nation Australasia, which focuses on concert promotions in Australia and New Zealand, and I am a 20% shareholder in that entity, giving that company both international and Australian ownership. I'd like to counter some of the misguided statements that have been made in relation to Live Nation's Australian operations in recent adverse media coverage. Firstly, it's important to note that Ticketmaster Australia's ticketing business and Live Nation's Australian concert businesses are completely separate entities, each with distinct reporting lines. While both are subsidiaries of LNE, they operate independently of each other in Australia. In relation to ticketing, all major Australian venues, which are often government-owned venues, have exclusive ticketing contracts with a nominated ticketing company and mandate all applicable ticketing fees. Accordingly, Live Nation uses various ticketing providers to sell tickets for its performances, depending on the ticket agent mandated by each individual venue hiring agreement. Consequently, fewer than 30% of Live Nation's Australian shows are ticketed by Ticketmaster. None of our arena tours are ticketed by Ticketmaster, only by Ticketek, whilst our stadium and theatre tours are ticketed by both Ticketmaster and by Ticketek, or by Moshtix, Oztix, or by self-ticketing venues, depending on each venue's arrangements. So it's the venues that determine ticketing partners, not the promoters who hire those venues, and Live Nation as promoter typically has no ability to support Ticketmaster to the detriment of competitors. Secondly, I'd like to say that first and foremost, Live Nation Australasia is a concert promotions company supporting artists in bringing their music to their fans by way of live performance. Our paramount operating principle is that it is the artists who make all the key decisions about their performances. It's also the artists who retain the vast majority of a show's revenue, as they should, because they're the ones who have attracted the ticket-buying audience. Nobody ever goes to a concert to see the promoter. The prevailing narrative that Live Nation itself retains the major part of ticketing revenues is completely false, as is the belief that we force artists to work for minimal returns for Live Nation's economic benefit. Our business can thrive only by nurturing the next generation of talent, both international and local, and we are also intensely focused on promoting Australian talent. We offer programs like Ones to Watch that foster emerging artists. We advocate for Australian artists to appear at all the shows of international headliners that we tour, and over 83% of those tours have featured Australian artist performances. We also represent more than 170 Australian artists across our agency roster, predominantly developing and emerging artists, and on average 85% of those have played performances in the last year. In the last 12 months alone, LNA has generated earnings in excess of $49 million for more than 150 Australian artists across 900 performances. Third point that I'd make is that Live Nation is not responsible for the ills that have recently affected Australia's live performance venues. Live Nation invests across the full gamut of live music businesses to best support our artists. One aspect of this investment is our great purpose-built and Live Nation managed venues that provide opportunities for artists and the best possible experience for fans. Australia boasts many wonderful venues, but Live Nation's venues represent only 1% of those, 6 out of approximately 2,700 venues. The 6 venues that we own and or operate in Australia are either public or private partnerships, and we welcome all touring artists and all promoters to our venues to offer a diverse experience for fans. Accordingly, 85% of the performances in our venues are promoted by other presenters, not by Live Nation. On its part, Live Nation provides content to hundreds of other venues in Australia, ranging in size from small community halls to clubs, theatres and arenas, and on up to sports stadiums and greenfield festival sites. Accordingly, most of the concerts we promote occur in venues not owned or operated by Live Nation. Finally, I would like to note that the Australian live music industry is a vital contributor to our nation's cultural identity and economy. To ensure its ongoing vibrancy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, government funding played a crucial role. This support has been instrumental in getting the industry back on track, and it's gratefully acknowledged. Post-pandemic, live music has seen an unprecedented surge in demand, highlighting its enduring power and cultural significance. But while live music has made a strong comeback, the rising costs of production, transport, insurance, etc. have reshaped tour economics. Careful management is now essential to sustain local tours and attract major international artists to Australia. Major artists have a global audience, a truly global audience now, and their availability for live appearances is finite and limited. If we cannot generate attractive economic outcomes for the major international stars, they will not come here, and our audiences will be deprived of the opportunity to see them perform live. In closing, I would state that we firmly believe that Live Nation has played a crucial role in the industry's recovery and in supporting artists, both international and Australian, and that we continue to contribute substantially to the Australian economy, to job creation and to the encouragement of tourism. We're grateful for the opportunity to appear today and welcome the committee's questions.
Mr Coppell, thank you for that quite broad statement. I really appreciate it. And you're certainly a name that's been synonymous with Australian live music for quite some years. I'll just note for the Hansard record, we've been joined by Ms Zoe McKenzie, a member of the committee, member for Flinders. Welcome, Ms McKenzie. Thank you for appearing today. That's much appreciated. We wanted to hear from Live Nation. You've come up a fair bit throughout the inquiry both good and bad, I must say. We've had evidence from some who do talk about the good work that Live Nation does and the important role that you play, and others, of course, have raised concerns, and we've seen those media reports, I guess. So we have got some questions for you. We've only got the hour, so I will ask committee members to keep their questions brief, and if Mr Coppell, if you wouldn't mind keeping your answers brief, and that way we can get through more questions if possible. But Deputy Chair, I'll throw to you first. You're right. All right, Ms Templeman.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Coppell. One of the, in your opening statement, you talked about musicians and some of the issues that have been put to us in evidence. So can I just confirm that in Australia, all musicians on all stages that you control in your venues, I guess big and small, that they all receive a performance fee at the events that you run?
Yes, that's correct.
And is there a scale of payments depending what does it depend on?
Well, the scale of payments depends on the commercial appeal of the artist. Our business runs essentially on the sale of tickets and attracting an audience. The standard arrangement with artists is a guaranteed fee, often against a percentage of the net income of the show, so that if the show does well, the artist takes a majority of the net profit from that show. If the show does badly, the artist receives a guaranteed fee that usually covers their expenses and performing costs.
Right, so expenses and costs, but not necessarily. So when you say performance costs, their time as well?
Yes. When I say performance costs, I mean the artist is basically running a business of their own. They're employing personnel, side musicians sometimes, if it's not a partnership, a band partnership, plus road crew, plus a manager, tour manager, etc. So they have certain costs, and they will not usually perform unless they can cover those costs with a guaranteed fee. Where the commercial element comes in is our ability to maximise their audience so that their percentage of the profit of the performance gives them a decent livelihood.
So I ran a business for 25 years, and if I only covered my costs, I'd be out of business because I wouldn't be able to eat. So just to clarify, you're confident that your basic fee covers the time of the performer as well as their costs, so that their performance earns them an income, not one that is entirely spent on their costs?
Yes, I'm confident of that. I mean, clearly our focus is on headline artists, and headline artists, there's a great deal of competition in our industry, and the fees for headline artists represent that competition, represent their commercial appeal. I'm confident that the artists that we tour earn a very decent income. So
one of our key concerns is Australian performers. I have no doubt that international performers are well remunerated to make the trek to Australia. One of the issues that's come up and been suggested by the industry is a levy on arena-style events, a $1 ticket levy that would then provide funds to be invested into smaller venues so that they can develop those artists, some of whom may be support acts for your international performers. Are you supportive of that $1 a ticket levy that the sector is discussing and has put forward to us in evidence?
I would like to see the detail of how that scheme would operate. And I think it's a little bit more complex than perhaps other people have suggested. Firstly, it's the headliner who sets the economic parameters of the tour. So the question is that levy coming out of the artist side of the financial arrangements or the promoter side of the financial arrangements? We as a promoter earn a fairly small percentage of the net income. In a $100 ticket, we may earn $4 or $5. So if we're contributing $1 of that, that's actually 20% of our operating revenue. The other questions I have are the detail, is this a national scheme or is it a state-by-state scheme? because clearly Victoria and New South Wales attract the majority of performances. So would the scheme, if it goes into operation, generate income nationally for all grassroots venues, or only as per state performances? I think there's a lot of devil in the detail. And while we are supportive of grassroots venues, and we certainly use them wherever appropriate, we'd like to see how this scheme would operate and how the funding precisely would work.
Mr Coppell, thank you for that. You just mentioned about the cut that you might make from a $100 ticket. That just brought me to a question I wanted to ask about the various fees that are charged. So if I'm a punter and I want to go to a gig, I go online. There are service fees, booking fees, transaction fees, facility fees, infrastructure fees on top of the ticket. Now, I imagine that as a punter, I would think, oh, well, the booking fee pays the booking agent and these other fees pay certain things. But of the baseline ticket cost, if I'm paying, as you say, $100 for the ticket and then these other fees on top, how much of that $100 for the ticket is also going to the booking agent and the venue and everything else that these fees are also going to? I mean, how many bites of the cherry are you getting?
Well, I'd actually disagree with that analysis. The ACCC about 15 years ago dictated that ticket prices should be all-inclusive of fees. Now, they didn't like, previously the industry would advertise $80 plus booking fees, and depending on which fees might apply to the transaction, the price could vary. The ACCC said we want an all-in pricing. If it's $89 including fees, that's the face value of the ticket. So the charges that you mentioned, which are mandated by the venues that we hire, are included in the face value of the ticket. The only additional charge is a transaction fee, which is not per ticket, it's per transaction, which goes to the ticket agent for service delivery, post-sale support and so forth. So you don't see a base ticket price plus X, Y, Z, A, B and C. There's a baseline ticket price, and each venue's hiring agreement may break that up so that the promoter has to pay a series of booking fees for different purposes, but it's not what the consumer sees.
All right. Thank you. I want to throw to Ms Mackenzie, then I'll come back to you, Ms Templeman. You're right. We'll stick with Ms Templeman for now, and then we'll come to you after.
Thanks, Chair. Mr Coppell, several years ago, Live Nation bought those long-standing Australian music festivals like Spilt Milk and Splendour in the Grass. Why did you cancel or pause those festivals? And from a business perspective, why not stick it out for a couple of slower years instead of just, they both got proven records of success, those ones in particular. So what was the rationale behind that, and what does that say about, I guess, the risk of festivals in Australia?
It's a very interesting, the festival environment post-COVID is a very interesting one. Although the demand for live music came back extremely strongly, essentially what we saw was a lot of the major headliners could sell out stadium tours. And when they played their own tours, they obviously have complete access to the financial returns, and they have complete control of the production elements. In a festival environment, they're sharing that revenue with the rest of the lineup of the festival, and they're subject to some restrictions on the shows that they can do. So with the success of the stadium shows, a lot of headliners said, fine, we'll do our own shows, not interested in looking at festivals. So festivals universally struggled to find strong headliner lineups. At the same time, with the cost of living crisis, the inflation, the rise in production costs, which is about 40% pre-COVID to post-COVID, the costs of festivals rose substantially. Ticket prices adjusted to reflect that. And a lot of people who previously bought tickets to see festivals decided, I'm not going. Because for festivals like Splendour in the Grass particularly, it's not a one-day investment. You're travelling to a remote location, you're buying a $400 ticket, $450 ticket for 3 days, you're paying travel, accommodation, food costs and so forth. It was a very substantial commitment. And we found the the coincidence of lack of strong headliner support or availability and lack of audience support meant that the ticket sales for those events fell so far below break-even requirements that continuing with them was impossible. It was very clear we needed a reset. And if you look across Australia's festival history, there have been periods of times in which festivals have been very prominent and other periods of time in which no festivals have been held or very few festivals have been held because the audience have moved in a different direction.
Can you see what will it take for there to be a change? I mean, a really key thing that we've heard is the affordability for overseas artists to come to Australia. Are you seeing any change in that? Because
it's become a challenging environment. The universal currency of the international touring business is the US dollar, right? We've gone from a situation when I started in the industry of relative parity between the Australian and US dollars to a situation where the Australian dollar has dipped to 50 cents versus the Australian dollar and currently sits about 64 cents. When artists' fees are denominated in US dollars and our dollar falls, suddenly it's a lot more expensive to come here. Airfare costs have risen substantially. Everything has risen substantially. So the ticket prices required for a tour to go ahead have increased, and therefore part of the audience has dropped away because it's become too expensive for a lot of people to go. It's a challenging environment in which to operate, which we have to carefully balance recovery of costs and the fees required and the affordability of the tickets for the Australian audience.
so what's your prediction for the Australian festivals sector?
I think we'll see a recovery. We haven't terminated our festival business. We've had to take a pause and a reset. We were intending to go ahead with Spilt Milk this year. Ultimately couldn't attract the level of headliner that we wanted to, but we're very confident we can bring those festivals back to full operation over the next 2 or 3 years.
Ms. Coker, thank you, Ms. Appleman.
Hello, Mr. Koppel, and thank you so much for being with us to answer questions today. I wanted to begin by raising an interview that you had with the Music Network, and you described in that interview Live Nation and its key competitors as having vertically integrated business models. And you said in that interview that the industry is very competitive. I just wanted to ask you, if the same company controls supply and production through integration, at what point in this model does competition occur?
Well, I think competition occurs at every point in this. To amplify my comments, we have a very small population base in Australia. Let's call it 27 million people. There are larger concert markets in cities like Los Angeles, New York, London, Tokyo, Mexico City, and so forth. So we're in a very high-risk business. We need to be invested across the full chain of venues, ticketing agencies, promoting companies, booking agencies, and so forth, to moderate the risk that we take on in bringing artists to this country and in touring major local artists. Essentially, our business model is we guarantee the artist a fee whether we sell one ticket or all the tickets. And the artist also takes a very large percentage of the net income, of the net profit of the shows that we produce. So we work on a very small margin. We don't have a great capacity to absorb losses, and they do occur because it's a fashion business in a sense. We have to guess ahead as to the size of the audience and hope that we're right 9 times out of 10. We have 2 major competitors and many smaller competitors as promoters, and at every aspect you're competing with someone to acquire the services of an artist. So it is competitive, even though it's vertically integrated to give yourself some degree of comfort financially.
Oh, thank you. So how do... just following on from that, so how do vertically integrated competitors know each other's prices, costs and margins? And if it's unknown, how do they set competitive prices and attractive employment conditions?
In terms of the headline artists that we're touring,
Yes.
essentially it's a moderated auction system. We will be approached often by a booking agent representing an international or a local artist. They'll say, X artist would like to tour Australia. What shows and what venues and how many performances can they do? At the same time, they'll be talking to our competitors often, and they will look at the different proposals they've received, negotiate back and forth and decide on who will be given the rights to the tour. So at that point, we've competed with a number of other prospective promoters to acquire the services of the artists. And in that sense, and all of us are paying very similar cost levels for production, hotels, transport and so forth, for venue hire and so forth. So our costs are very much in a very similar band of expense.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've heard from artists who say that they cannot make money, that competition's uncertain, and promoters are reputed to be unfair. What's your thoughts about that perception, and how do we change that?
I wonder at what sector of the industry has that perception. You know, my experience is, because of the level of competition in the Australian industry, if an artist has an audience, there is a lot of competition for their services, and that results in their fees being maximised. You know, I think there's obviously a level of artists who hasn't got a sizable audience where that might occur, but we don't tend to work in that sector of the industry. We tend to look at bigger levels of headliner, and quite frankly, I'm always amused by the comments that the artist fees are forced down. My 45-year plus experiences, they've always been forced upwards because competition drives it there.
So can I just have one more question? So part of our committee, we're looking at how do we enrich Australian music, create more jobs in the sector. What strategies would Live Nation recommend to do that?
We've had a number of discussions with the Australian Music Managers Forum, and they've said quite frankly that they have seen difficulty over the last several years in breaking new headliners in Australia, in building their clients to a broader audience. And I think there are systemic changes that have occurred. A lot of people now get their musical input from streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal and so forth. Those are globally curated streaming services that emphasise international artists. There's no focus on Australian artists. I think the number of people listening to radio has also fallen away to some degree. So I think the exposure to new Australian artists has been reducing. I think that is one of the key challenges, because if you're not familiar with someone's music, you're not going to buy a ticket to go and see them live. You know, it's familiarity that drives concert attendance. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done in those areas to try and give Australian music a broader platform.
Thank you, Ms. Gaker. Mr. Koppel, it's clear that Live Nation's a big player internationally and here in Australia. I hope I'm not verballing you by saying that what I'm hearing from you is that even though you're a big player, you're multifaceted, that you believe there are enough competitive elements both within your own business and externally to keep things competitive. But one of the issues I've got is making sure that there's bargaining power for various players. And I think either you're on the record or Live Nation is on the record saying, for example, that bands approve the full plan and budget, but I'm wondering whether it's the reality of those sorts of things a take it or leave it process, a bit like accepting the terms and conditions of your iPhone if you want to keep using it. How much bargaining power do Australian musicians, and I do draw the distinction between Australian musicians and the big international headline acts, how much bargaining power do Australian musicians have in their relationship with Live Nation?
I think every artist with whom we work has a level of bargaining power, and that level of bargaining power increases with the commercial appeal of the artists. Very clearly, there are a number of people who wish to employ different artists here, whether they're international or local. That competition drives up the artist fees. If you haven't got a sizable audience, you struggle to have bargaining power. If you have a sizable audience, you have very, very substantial bargaining power. And I think that's the nature of, I guess, a commercial capitalist industry. The more appeal you have, the higher your price.
Oh, that's fairly blunt, which I appreciate, I must say. That's you're saying it how it is. Now, you've told Four Corners that the market structures in Australia differ significantly from those in the US. What are those major differences between the two jurisdictions, and what does that difference mean for competition and particularly for musicians' income in Australia? I mean, what are those differences in market structures?
Well, the difference of the market structure, essentially, Live Nation has a dominant position in the US concert market. It's by far the major promoter. Perhaps it has 75 or 80% of the concert market in the USA, and Ticketmaster is also the major ticketing provider in that country. In Australia, there are three companies, Live Nation, PEG and AEG Frontier, that have roughly equivalent shares of the major concert market, maybe 30% each, year on year, depending on who you're touring. And Ticketmaster is a smaller business than Ticketek. Ticketek probably has, over 50% of the Australian ticketing market, and Ticketmaster substantially less than that. So in that sense, structurally, there's a very different competitive environment in Australia than in the USA.
Thank you. And one last one from me before we go back to Ms Templeman, who I think has got some more. But I was concerned to read claims that, and they are claims, I don't say, but that Live Nation has put venues on hold, so to speak, or has indeed perhaps encouraged or coerced others to do so, which has the effect of locking up capacity of venues in order to prevent competitors from staging acts. So, for example, if you've got a big act coming along and playing, that somehow you lock up that venue on the shoulders around that to stop other competitors from, drawing audiences. Can you go to any of that and tell me whether any of that's true or any of it is, why that occurs?
No, I think that's very inaccurate. Essentially, when you're looking to route a tour, it's a fairly intricate process because you're looking often at 6 different venues, sometimes 8 or 10 different venues, different availability. You check which dates are available, you check which dates are contracted, you try and construct an itinerary and you try and clear that itinerary. All the venues have a very clear position, and that is that the promoter who ends up with a particular artist's tour gets first claim to any dates, even if another competitor has a prior pencil booking on them. So it's almost impossible to block somebody out. If somebody has the rights to a tour, they will clear an itinerary, and if you're holding a date for that particular tour and you've been unsuccessful, the venue will clear your hold and give it to the person who's acquired the rights to the tour. So I don't think that is a realistic criticism.
Thank you. And I just want to, just so I can really put a dot on top of the I on that one, because Live Nation, as you say, owns venues, controls venues, as well as other elements of the industry. You've given previous evidence that you have different competitive pressures even within your own ownership structure. You're confident that one element of Live Nation's business in Australia isn't essentially looking after another element of Live Nation's business in Australia to lock out competitors?
I'm very confident of that. I don't think there's the ability to do that the way the industry functions on the ground. We certainly don't give preference to Live Nation tours in our venues. It purely comes down to who's ready to contract a particular date at the earliest opportunity. And we don't. As I said earlier, we have over 80% of performances in the 6 Live Nation venues that we operate are by outside promoters.
Thank you. Ms Templeman.
Thank you. I just want to talk a bit about venues. So in your opening statement, you talked about Live Nation owning less than 1% of music venues in the country, 6 out of about 2,700. I just wondered, so that what are you including in that 2,700 venues?
That's the figure that's been suggested, I think, by Live Performance Australia, the peak entertainment industry body, as based on a survey of those venues that present music on a regular basis.
Great. So that's including pubs and really small venues as well.
I think it includes everywhere that live music is performed.
Yeah.
On a
So
paid ticket.
if we could talk about the sector where you are most dominant, and that is in the medium or larger venue sector, what proportion of the medium and large sector would you estimate that you have?
Well, we don't have any arenas that we operate in Australia, so we have 0% of the arena business. We have a couple of theatres, being the Palais Theatre, which we manage on a lease arrangement with the City of Port Phillip. We have Anita's Theatre in Thirroul, New South Wales, which we also manage under a lease arrangement. And we have a couple of medium capacity 2,000 and 3,000 seat ballroom style venues, one being Fortitude Music Hall in Brisbane and the other being Hindley Street Music Hall in Adelaide. So really there are competitive venues in all of those markets of different capacities. It would be hard to me off the cuff to estimate what percentage our venues represent in those cities.
But it's a whole lot more than 1% of that sort of scale venue.
Yes, it's a whole lot more than 1% of that scale of venue. But, essentially when we started those venues, particularly in Brisbane and Adelaide, we saw a gap in the market. Brisbane lacked a venue of that size for performances of that size, so did Adelaide. So we felt that those were opportunities to fill that gap in the market.
And is that the strategy, to identify the gaps and fill them, and in that way you are likely to be one of the few operators in that particular slice of the market?
Yeah, well, very certainly. I mean, the live performance industry breaks down into two streams. One is you work with the artists, the other is you operate the venues. We're trying to bridge both of those streams, and our strategy with venues is to find areas which are underserviced in the current Australian environment and provide an alternative. And as I said earlier, over 80% of the performances in our venues are by other presenters. So they clearly recognise that there is a gap and that the venues that we've provided, operated, constructed, managed and so forth, support their operations substantially, much more than they support, in fact, Live Nation's operations.
So can you understand why musicians have, and others have expressed to us in evidence, and that it feels like there's a place at which there is a lot of control by Live Nation about who gets access to those mid-sized venues, and that you are quite a dominant player in that mid and some would say large venue space, short of arenas. Can you understand why people have expressed to us concerns about that?
To be frank, I actually can't, because I look at the structure of each city individually. We have no venues in Sydney, which is equal biggest market in Australia. We operate two venues in Melbourne. One is the Palais Theatre, which is a 2,800 seat capacity theatre, and the other is Melbourne Festival Hall, which we have a leasehold arrangement with the owners. Again, that's between 2,500 and 4,000, depending on the mode you set it up in. We don't have a venue in Perth. We have one venue in Brisbane. All of those venues are open to anyone to hire. Any artist who thinks they've got an audience and wants to promote themselves can hire the venue and present their own show. They don't need a promoter to do it. And one of the things that I've experienced through my career is a lot of Australian artist managers have always promoted their own clients' shows and haven't used promoters because they believe they can make more money for their client and they can potentially do a better job. I don't think that that's been the case, but that's certainly been a very evident practice. So I don't see validity in the argument that we control the industry to that extent. Our venues are open to anyone to hire. We don't block anyone. The more shows we do, the better from our perspective. So I don't see how we are blocking other people. I don't see how we control the industry.
When I think about Brisbane and the Fortitude Music Hall, I can't think of another venue of a similar size up there. So in that way, one would say you had a monopoly or a hold on Brisbane. I don't know all the other capitals where you have things like Adelaide or even places like Wollongong. But in terms of acquiring those sorts of venues, is that what we should expect to see going forward, that your plans are to continue to identify those sorts of gaps and where you see a profitable opportunity, take those? So should we expect to see more venues being owned by Live Nation?
Well, we are actively seeking venue opportunities. We feel Australia is underserviced in certain aspects of venue availability, and I think that has a knock-on effect with Australian artists, because really there is a progression. You know, as a performer, you start at the smaller venues. If your craft is good enough, you build to larger capacity venues. There needs to be a stepping stone. You don't jump from, let's say, the corner hotel with 700 people to Rod Laver Arena with 14,000 people. You need to build your progression. We're trying to offer stepping stones in the venue world that offer different capacities. Brisbane used to have a Festival Hall Brisbane. It was a 4,000 capacity venue, very suitable for standing shows. That property was sold and redeveloped for apartments, and there was a gap in the Brisbane market between 1,400 capacity at the Tivoli and 12,000 at the Brisbane Entertainment Centre. Fortitude Music Hall has helped fill that gap and give a stepping stone progression for artists building their audience in Brisbane.
Yeah, I think we would completely agree with how important it is that artists get access on their journey.
Certainly is. Ms. Coker, you've got one?
Yes, I have a question about a local event in my region. There in Torquay, there's a area. It's a Torquay Common, and it's you lease it out for a festival throughout the summer, and from my knowledge, it's called the Summer Salt Festival, and it's going on this year and into next year. Can you tell me a little bit about do you know much about that? What you're doing on that space?
I can't say that I do. Those events are presented by a company called Face to Face, which we acquired a majority interest in last year. They're very, very active promoters, very, very skilled promoters, and they have developed regional audiences. We've been focused very much on capital city audiences as Live Nation itself. Face to Face have developed a great regional touring circuit, and one of the venues they've used is Torquay. They've also promoted in Mornington. They've also promoted in a number of other areas, Hunter Valley and so forth, around Australia. They operate that show. I can't say that I have a great deal of knowledge about it.
Okay. Look, I just wanted to mention there is a festival that has occurred there over a number of years called the Nightjar, and they were attracting many thousands of people to that venue. When Live Nation came to be in Torquay and offer performances, concerts, festivals, they have found their numbers have declined. Now, obviously this is it's a business decision of Live Nation to set up in Torquay because it's a very popular location and many thousands of people are attracted to Torquay, particularly over the summer months. My concern is that when you come into an area like Torquay in my electorate, those smaller concerts and festivals tend to be greatly affected. I'm just wondering, in terms of how do we get that balance right? And as the big multinational that comes into these smaller regional centres, do you feel there's any obligation to actually still support and help those smaller festivals to remain, so that we in Australia do get that support for our artists, small artists that are now giving them an opportunity to flourish?
I think the reality of the business is it is a very competitive business. There is a certain finite amount of money available for people to spend to go and see live entertainment, and I think they will make choices based on what's attractive. We certainly don't go into a market looking to target existing events, but I think what can happen is that everyone has to raise their game to remain relevant and attractive to their audience. I'm not familiar with the Nightjar festival that you mentioned, but I think there have been quite a few instances in other areas where long-standing events have retained their audience and been able to function even with a major promoter doing shows in that area. It doesn't exclude them. I think it just means that they have to look much more carefully to how they appeal to their audiences.
Thank you, Mr. Coker. Thank you, Mr. Koppel. I've got a couple, then we'll throw back to Ms. Templeman. When I buy a ticket, which is inclusive of all those charges that we've talked about previously, what percentage of that total, on average, goes to the musician?
It's a function of the venue, and it's a function of the cost of presenting the performance. The artist will normally take in a headline major venue situation between 85 and 95% of the net income from the show.
And when we say the artist, so that goes to the artist, and then it's up to the artist to disperse that amongst their entourage. But that's what goes to the artist.
That's what goes to the artist, and there will be an agreement in advance of the performance as to which party bears which costs. The artist is receiving a guarantee against a percentage of the net income of the performance, and the agreement between the artist and the promoter will say artist pays for certain costs, whether it's international transportation, their own payrolls, they may pay for the hotels and so forth, and the promoter will pay for other costs, venue, advertising, catering, and so forth.
So there's been evidence in the US, and I do stress that, of course, the US arm of your business is different to the Australasian arm, but there was evidence to the US Senate inquiry into Live Nation and Ticketmaster where American band Lawrence, I believe it was, they said their cut was diminished after all Live Nation fees were deducted, and I'm quoting here, if they want to take 10% of the revenues and call it a facility fee, they can and have. If they want to charge $30,000 for the house nut, I'm not sure what that is, but they can and have. And if they want to charge us $250 for a stack of 10 clean towels, they can and have, band member Clyde Lawrence said. And then Live Nation's chief financial officer told the Senate inquiry, but essentially, look, if there's issues with transparency, they'll look into it. Are those sorts of fees, do they happen in Australia? You know?
No, not really. By the sound of that, and I certainly wouldn't hold myself out as an expert in the American concert industry or venue industry, but on the sound of that, it sounds like the performance was in an amphitheatre, and the amphitheatres traditionally in America, open air sound shells basically. The house nut refers to an all-in expense item for staffing, power, cleaning, etc., etc.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And one last one for me before I throw to Ms. Templeman. Similarly, because I guess what I'm leading to is I want to see maximise musicians getting their cut, while of course you need to take your fair cut as well. But does Live Nation take a cut from things like merchandise sales at venues on top of the fee, on top of the other fees that you charge the artists and the consumers? And if you do take a cut on merchandise sales, why? and is that a demonstration of how much power you have in the relationship?
Well, in relation to merchandise charges, the industry standard has always been that the venues charge a percentage of sales for the sale of merchandise at their venues. And that's on the basis of providing the facilities to do that and the opportunity to do that. As a company, we took the position in the last couple of years that in venues up to a certain capacity, we won't charge any merchandising commission at all. And the Trifford, which is an 800 capacity venue that we operate in Brisbane, does not charge any merchandise charges at all. We also reduced the level of charges in larger venues that we operate. And by comparison, if you, as an artist, play any of the arenas in Australia, you'll be charged 17.5% of the merchandise sales you conduct there.
Okay.
And those are all government-owned venues operated by private management, and very similar percentages apply in the stadiums in Australia as well. It's the norm of the industry that merchandising sales attract a commission.
Right. Thank you. And just you mentioned that it's always been a feature. You've been in the industry for a fair few years, so this predates Live Nation, is what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's been from day one. Essentially, the venue operators have said, if you're conducting an enterprise on our premises, we need a share of that to justify letting you do that.
Thank you. Ms Templeman?
Just want to ask you about dynamic ticket pricing. What's your view, or Live Nation's view, on whether it's a positive or negative influence on consumer confidence in the music industry?
The music industry has a very, I think, threatening trend, and that is the secondary ticketing market and the scalping market that goes on. Artists, present their performances and provide the attraction that draws ticket buyers in there. Yet there is an outside industry, a very substantial outside industry, that preys on that uses bots and other illicit means to acquire tickets to in-demand performances and sell them at a very inflated markup. And none of that money comes back into the industry. There's no investment, there's no risk-taking, there's purely arbitrage. One of the things we have grappled with as an industry for the last decade is how we address that and how we capture as much of the value as we can for the artist. One of the ways we're trying to do it at the moment is what's been misnamed as dynamic ticket pricing. It's not dynamic in the sense that, say, Uber or the airlines operate a computer-generated algorithm that when there's a high demand journey, the price of that journey increases to the point where it deters patronage. We speak to the artist before every tour and we say, we think this will be a high demand performance. Do you want to consider setting aside a percentage of the house at a higher ticket price that we can release if the demand turns out to be there? That will capture some of the value that will otherwise go to scalpers. And the artist will say, okay, we'll do 10% of the house or 5% of the house or X thousand tickets, and we'll cap the increased price at like 2 times or 3 times the face value of the ticket. So we'll nominate those tickets in advance and we'll put them on hold. We'll put the show on sale. We'll see what the level of demand is. If the demand is not what is expected, then those tickets will be marked back to the standard price, because very clearly, if there's not a high demand, the scalping market will not be putting tickets out at an inflated price. If there is a high demand, we'll release those pre-nominated higher price tickets to capture some of the value, because clearly, if a scalper buys a ticket for $200 and he can sell it for $400, he'll do that. If he's bought it for $400, he can't sell it for $400. The attraction has disappeared.
So when those tickets, if those tickets are released at a higher price, who benefits from that? How is the split on the additional premium price of those tickets done? Is it the same as all the other ticket arrangements, or is there a higher percentage to the musician or to you guys?
Essentially, the net income from the higher price ticket flows into what's called the pot, which is the amount of money that's divided up between musician and promoter. The ticketing company will take a small extra fee for management of the process and for providing the tools to conduct that operation. But essentially, the artist will benefit by the vast majority of that extra income.
Can I ask just one more? Sorry. We talked about your thinking around venues. What is your strategy and intent in terms of buying different parts of the supply chain? Where should we expect to see Live Nation continuing to grow and be very active?
It's a very good question. I don't know how to answer that, quite frankly. It's not commercial in confidence. But essentially, as I said earlier, Australia is a very interesting market. We're an affluent country. We have a great demand for entertainment. But as a promoter operating in this market, there are only 27 million people in total. We're in a very high-risk business. We're guessing the level of an audience. Our break-even points on larger tours are 80% or higher. If we get it wrong, we incur a very substantial loss. So we look to diversifying our business into areas like venues to reduce our risk, to better support our concert promotion activities. I think we'll continue to look for opportunities in our core businesses, both as promoters and as venue operators. And as Ticketmaster will no doubt do as a ticketing company as well.
Thank you, Mr. Coppell. We've got one last one from Ms. Coker.
Very quickly, ones to watch. You mentioned that in your opening statement. I'm really interested to see how Live Nation can give back to artists and actually help promote and encourage artists who are starting out. I'd just like to know a little bit about that.
Happy to provide information about the Ones to Watch program. It's certainly one that we feel gives an opportunity to emerging artists to establish a broader platform. I'd like to give you a complimentary example, which is the artist Tones and I, who is a Melbourne-based artist, started a career as a busker on the street in Melbourne, released some records, had a very, very big international hit called Dance Monkey. We put Tones and I out with Pink on Pink's 20 Stadium tour earlier this year, put her in front of an audience of nearly 1 million ticket buyers. She has now toured and done 22 shows as a headliner in arenas around Australia. And I look at that and I see the progression of an Australian artist who started out busking and has ended up as an arena headliner. And I see the potential for any Australian emerging artist, if given the opportunity, to have a similar success path.
Mr. Coppell, I've got one last one. It's a bit of a free kick for you, I guess. What role should governments have in relation to live music? Is more or less intervention required? And as a bit of a catch-all, what would you like to see as the principal, most important finding or recommendation that this committee could make in terms of protecting, preserving and enhancing live music in Australia?
I think that's a very, very broad question, and it's difficult to give you a succinct answer. Certainly from our perspective as a promoter, we would like to see more support and enforcement on the scalping secondary ticketing side of things. We think, if you look internationally at companies like Viagogo and StubHub, they're billion-dollar enterprises, and they're enterprises that are built on the back of artist endeavour, where the artist sees no return. We may have a 3 or 4% of gross income operating margin. StubHub and Viagogo operate at 23% margin, and that margin is earned on the back of artists who their tickets are taken and put into the secondary market. So we see that as a very important initiative. Both legislative and enforcement would be key. We also see in relation to festivals, and this is not necessarily a Commonwealth government function, it's probably more a state government function, a growth in expenses that have made festivals a much riskier and more expensive endeavour. And we also welcome the support we've had from government, both in restarting the industry after COVID, but also in, a number of state governments have seen the tourism benefit and the employment benefit that can be generated by live music performances. Formerly, sport would have the lion's share of that supporting government expenditure, but now music is attracting it, and I think that that's a great development. It's broadening the support that government can give to the Australian culture in general. So there are a number of areas. It's a very complex field, though.
Thank you very much. Mr Coppell, we're pretty much right on time. We started dead on 9 and we're finishing at dead on 10. Thank you for your attendance at today's hearing. You've really been put under the gun. If you've been asked to provide any additional information or if there's anything else you would like to provide, please forward this to the Secretariat by Monday 9 December 2024. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to which you may suggest corrections, and there being no further witnesses scheduled, I ask a member to move that the committee stand adjourned.
Happy to move.
Thank you, Member for Corangamite, and the committee is adjourned. Mr Coppell, thank you for your evidence, and you're free to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.